FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and today is April 22nd, 2020. Well, we've seen the price of oil literally go negative. The country is still pretty much shut down, limited openings in states around the country. A few states never even closed down in the first place. And the question is it going to be too little, too late? Can we avoid a catastrophic global depression, or are we already in it? And, well, the person to find out from is Danielle DiMartino Booth. Hey, first, before we get started, your opinions, your comments, always welcomed. Please email me, kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com. Danielle, it's great to have you back on the show. And, hey, watch an appearance with you today with Stuart Varney over at Fox News, and you were saying unemployment potentially 15%. I mean, these are depressionary numbers, aren't they?
Well, they're certainly very close to depressionary numbers. If you're talking about the Great Depression, when 25% of the workforce was unemployed. But just to put things in perspective, during the Great Financial Crisis, the highest the unemployment rate ever got was 10%. So this is by and far the worst thing any living American has ever experienced.
Yeah, agreed. And in many states, the worst thing is that you file for unemployment and their systems has seized up. In Florida here, I think they're about 600,000 cases behind. And a friend of mine said his wife just got her first check. I think she filed 2 weeks ago. Nobody in their wildest dreams designing an unemployment insurance system could have ever contemplated 1 million claims in less than a month.
No, they certainly could not have. But what we're learning very quickly is that state budgets have been going in the wrong direction in recent years. And I say that in the sense of state budgets have neglected their unemployment insurance programs to the extent that I want to say in the state of Florida, they were looking for computer programmers who would have, with code from back when I would have been in college.
Cobalt, huh?
You got it. Cobalt.
We're dating ourselves.
People with Cobalt experience. So, right now we look to the state of Pennsylvania as kind of being the efficiency benchmark, and they've got 20% of their workforce has filed for unemployment insurance. It's a massive, huge number, but I only throw that out there to put in perspective the fact that states like Florida and Texas have only had about 7% of their population, their workforce within their states apply for insurance, for unemployment insurance. And that tells you that there's a tremendous backlog of people waiting to get through these systems, these antiquated systems. And, time is ticking by for many American families. And I'm not necessarily talking about the people who are closest to the poverty line, who clearly are affected, but we're talking about people much higher up on the income spectrum. 38%, for example, of Americans making $75,000 or more had zero in savings headed into this. So it's a wider swath of America than you would think.
And we had the stimulus to purportedly help small business. At least that's what they told us. And what I came to find out is that the banks all set up back channels for their larger small businesses that owed them money so that they could channel the aid to those companies first to help ensure that their loans get repaid. And that was not the way that the system, that the stimulus was envisioned. At least that certainly wasn't the way it was explained to us, was it?
It wasn't, and it makes you wonder. buddy of mine over at Deutsche Bank, Torsten Slock, he kind of went through the numbers and found that 70% of the loans were for $350,000 or less. And he also found that the most efficient operators, if you will, were the smaller community banks.
Exactly.
That were ready to push through these applications. Thank you very much for the people who need it the most.
Yeah, I will tell you one bank that I know. It's a medium, large size bank or a large, medium sized bank. Take your pick. They had on their website, we're working day and night to open the portal for the stimulus. At the same time, they had an office, and I have the emails to prove it. They had an office taking applications from their favored few. So the next stimulus, if it's just going to be rinse, repeat, isn't really going to get to the people who need it most. Except that I guess now all the banks know the ropes and it's easier to clear it. But even still, how many trillions of dollars do we need to pay out to every small business in America? Is there a point where it's just worth reopening the country and we take our chances?
Well, that's the $1 trillion question. And, a lot of the world right now is looking not so much to China and not to Singapore at all, which is, there's a massive second wave that's starting to move through Asia, which is very disheartening. But a lot of the world is looking to Germany, which is beginning to open its economy, but it's doing so in such a conservative manner. There won't be any large gatherings, for example, until after August the 31st. And the difference, in what frightens me is that Americans are looking to Germany as this example, saying, look at how quickly they opened up, but they also tested an enormous percentage of their population. And compared to the United States, right now we're testing about 150,000 people per day. And most businesses say that they will be comfortable opening up if there are 500, 750,000 tests per day. Yeah. And we're nowhere near that capacity. So the greatest risk is that we look at a simple timeline and say, the worst is past for Germany and they're opening, and look at the microcosm of New York City and say the worst is past for New York City, therefore we should open up the entire country.
Well,
and all of a sudden we end up having to shut down all over again. And that
would be
is
a nightmare.
The biggest risk. That is a nightmare. That's the right word.
All right. So I look for, unlike most of my usual information, I actually look at the New York Times for this one because they've got a map called Where Cases Are Rising Fastest. And 2 weeks ago, it was bright orange. Everything on that map was lit up. Now that there's hardly any orange spots on it, there are little towns like Grant County, Wisconsin, has 23 cases and it's doubling every 4 days. That's probably not going to last. I'm in Palm Beach County, Florida, and they're not even getting the map right because at least according to their numbers, we had 1,000 more cases over the past day. And they say it's doubling every 17 days, which just is not right. So point is, the rate that it's doubling is really fallen off the cliff. Hospitalizations are down, but obviously deaths are going to be a lagging indicator. In Florida, the numbers going down while testing becomes more accessible. So, what do we do here? Because shutting down the global economy potentially is going to cost a lot more lives than just letting it go and taking sensible steps, whether it's covering your face or social distancing, not having large numbers of people congregating. What's better here? Because a collapse, which is what we're heading for if we're not there already, of the global economy is going to have far more catastrophic consequences perhaps than just letting this thing go, which is already in the wild. We know that. There's really no way to stop it. And even when we've taken these measures, the number has continued to go up until it just naturally starts to go down.
Well, I wish that being posed with such questions actually could elicit elegant answers. But the truth is, we can't know what the right answer is, mainly because this has only been around for 5 months.
Yes.
We forget that not that the Chinese government properly reported it, and that's a huge problem in and of itself. But we forget that the first case in China was November the 17th. So we really are 5 months into gathering knowledge about a virus that is clearly much more contagious, but we don't know how much more fatal than many of its predecessors, again, because testing capabilities globally have been so disparate. But it's unfortunately we're learning as we go. And again, the risk is that there's a premature reopening in the economy, and that people become carriers and don't know it because they're asymptomatic, they're young. And it's very hard to answer these questions. And there are no right answers, because you're right, because the economic devastation is going to be so terrible for so many American families, for so many people around the world.
Yeah. I'm of the opinion it's there's one Israeli biostatistician who measured it every place where it broke out, with the exception of China, because you just don't know the numbers. And even there, basically had a 70-day course. Whether there's a secondary spread or not, we don't know. But in certain counties here, we're doing stuff like Marion County. Now, there's hardly anybody that lives there. In Florida, they've had 129 cases and 3 deaths. Is it worth shutting down these rural counties where they really don't have the impact? I mean, some of these counties have had 1 or 2 cases and no deaths. So do we have to have the same reaction to every area of the country? Are there other areas where we just let it go because they're not that populated, and why shut that part down?
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Silver One Resources is an exploration and development company backed by strategic investors Eric Sprott and SSR Mining. At Silver One's Candelaria Mine project in Nevada, there is already a historic resource estimated at 127 million ounces of silver, which Silver One is developing and advancing. The company's Phoenix Silver project, located within the Arizona Silver Belt, is an early-stage exploration project on which native silver vein fragments have been discovered near surface. One grab sample assayed an astounding 14,688 ounces per ton. Yes, that's right, ounces, not grams. Silver One has tremendous exploration potential, is extremely leveraged to the price of silver, and is cashed up and poised to increase shareholder value. Silver One trades in New York under the ticker SLVRF and in Toronto under the ticker SVE. To learn more, go to silverone.com. That's silverone.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Well, there is certainly something to be said for being strategic and being mindful of density with the areas that you're shutting down. So I certainly hear where you're coming from, and it really is up to the capabilities of the governments of policing the dense areas to ensure that there's no overabundance of travel with people leaving the big cities. There was a problem with a lot of people leaving the New York area and becoming effectively carriers to other parts of the country. So a lot of this comes down to, in a way, if you will, if you want to think back to school, the honor code. And being a good American, if you will, and doing what you're told to do, whether it's staying put or social distancing. What worries me is when you see something like, the Jacksonville beaches open up and you see people all over each other, and you're like, no, wait a minute, we're giving you back your freedoms, and that's fantastic and wonderful, and go enjoy the beach, but don't crowd in, because that's what got this problem started in the first place. Was a lot of the spring breakers were like, to heck with you, I'll do what I want, when I want, and where I want it. And then they carried it back to, in the case of Austin, Texas, where I am, it became a cluster in and of itself.
I know. Hey, I would just, one more thing on the virus, and then we'll kind of move on, because really I'm more concerned. In many respects, the virus is the global financial pandemic. So Washington State, that was really the first state to get hit really hard with it. And now we look at King County, which is Seattle, and they've had a total of 5,300 cases. Now, the rate of change is so low that they don't even put out a number of doubling. There's virtually no cases being reported. So perhaps the worst is behind us, but I guess, like you said, that remains to be seen. I'm more of an optimist on it, but economically, all right, you live for this stuff. Did you ever think you would see the day where people would be paying other people to take their oil rather than to sell it, just to take it off their hands? I mean, these are really insane markets.
They are, and it's beyond the realm of anything that you could envision. And what concerns me is that it's also a reflection not just of the globality, if you will, of this pandemic and the fact that it has shut down travel, which, by the way, employs 1 out of every 10 people on planet Earth in the past few years have been employed in travel and tourism. But what concerns me is that oil is more of a reflection of what's going on in the global economy, because it can't be properly reflected in the stock market or in the bond market, because the Federal Reserve has parked itself there and is artificially propping up prices. So if you're bearish and you want to express yourself, you're going to go find the market that is not being that the Fed has not infiltrated, if you will.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about the last time we talked about over a year ago, and watching at the unsustainability of the way the global economic system has evolved, what it evolved into. And I've come up with Lutz's Law of Unsustainable Trends. And that is, a trend that is unsustainable will eventually stop and even reverse at an unknowable point in the future. And then corollary to that is a trend in motion continues in motion until it becomes unsustainable. Now, we've got so many unsustainable things going on, the U.S. debt, the trade deficit, population growth, China's economy, and that's just to name a few. Have we gotten to the point where we've got to look for a different way of handling all this because everything has become unsustainable?
Well, I think you bring up an important point, and that is, and boy, do I get pushback when I go here, so to speak. The world economy, because the global financial crisis was resolved with piling more indebtedness on top of indebtedness, that ended up setting the stage for the vulnerability that the global economy found itself in. And like I said, people do not like to hear this. But the reason that the situation became as grave as it did, as quickly as it did, comes down to how indebted we were going in. So it ballooned overnight because of how vulnerable we had allowed the system to become. I mean, if you think about corporate debt in America being at record levels, to take just one example.
Yeah, and we didn't even bother trying to solve it. We just poured money onto it, like you said, and really, my belief, back to 2008 and 2009, and I've said this, is that the next crash was going to be far worse. Never thinking that it'd be a pandemic, not having any idea what the precipitating cause would be, but in fact, it was going to implode. And this just was this was dramatic because it literally closed the global economy and then showed the cracks. All the cracks became craters and implosion. And that's what happens when you don't solve problems when they arise and you put them off, you kick the can down the road, you wind up with a pandemic, both financially and health-wise.
You do, and you may or may not have noticed, but we've decided to print our way out of this mess as well. So,
yeah.
and right now it's just the same situation as it was in when Lehman was imploding, or at least it's the same train of thought. Well, we have to do what we're doing right now. We have to put the fire out. And you say to them, but you were also the arsonist, and of course they don't want to hear that. but they're applying more of the same medicine, and unfortunately they're telling us the same lies, that it's going to be easy enough for the Fed to extricate itself from all of these emergency facilities when the time comes. Just let some semblance of normality set back in, and then the markets won't be as reliant on the Fed. Well, we know how that worked out when the Fed made this feeble attempt at shrinking its balance sheet and raising interest rates. The markets imploded.
Yeah, for sure. And now, I mean, they managed to rein in inflation by sterilizing all the money that the banks got. So they deposited it with the Fed, excess reserves, and they got 25 basis points risk-free for doing that. But it's not going to be that easy. We're literally in the world of helicopter money. So what does that do to the purchasing power of our currency units? And not just the United States, it's the world over, right?
It is. And, we're starting to get into some very, very thorny societal issues because, as the coronavirus hits places like India and Africa, where there is absolutely widespread poverty, and especially in the case of India, which I'm writing about this week, the density is such that it could spread like wildfire, and they have very, very little in the way of testing capability to where you could see a double tragedy. In other words, you could see poverty, starvation, and at the same time, very high fatality rates from the coronavirus because there are no social safety nets in many of these countries. And we've certainly not even begun to think about those implications yet. But we are part of the world, and the more stress there is, regardless of where it is in the world, the more paranoia there is going to be about travel. And the longer that's going to be sustained in households all over the world, in their psyches.
Well, my gut feel is, and let's just assume the best possible scenario occurs 2 weeks out, it's really past like it has in other places in the world, and it doesn't come back. What kind of world are we left with here where the Fed just writes checks? It's like if you've ever been, I haven't been there in years, to Tijuana, it's these swarms of beggars come up and you feel so bad and you start giving them money, and then all of a sudden you realize, I don't have enough money for this. I can't keep doing handouts. And yet the Fed, it doesn't seem like this eventuality has dawned on them. And then there's the question of how effective it's going to be anyway, even if they bailed out every man, woman, and child in the country and company, deserving or not. Where are we left after this?
That's exactly right. And it's so hard to know. And at the moment, that is what is so infuriating about the Fed appearing to be selective in helping out large companies when there is something called the bankruptcy code that allows for the retention of employees, but it wipes out the shareholders and the subordinated debt holders. But that doesn't seem to be really where the focus is. And again, that's a poor reflection on who we are as a society, that it's gotten to be that public policy in any way, shape, or form is favoring those who need it the least.
Yeah, I agree with you there. On the other hand, being a recovering attorney, I can tell you that the magnitude of the situation, really, the bankruptcy courts are not where the solution rests. For some of them, yes. And I put together what I called a taxpayers bailout bill of rights. First thing you do, if a company comes in and they got their hand out and they have to have it, survival, existential, the top 5 management go. All buyouts stop, their bonuses stop and get tied to actual real profitability and stability of the company, and a bunch of other things, no lobbying, because then they just take this money, they lobby, they pay out bonuses, and we feel like idiots. So they throw the middle class a bone with the PPP and the EIDL, and then the money runs out within moments, and the banks are gaming that, so they get their cut of it. And really, there's got to be kind of a legislative/legal solution to it. You can't just throw 50 million people into bankruptcy. you think the unemployment system's bad? You know what the courts are like, and they're up to date technologically, but in terms of efficiency, it's one of the least productive sectors of the economy. So we need a global solution. Is it a debt jubilee? I don't know. I mean, something has to be done because the debt, right, is unsustainable, can't be paid back. So it's got to go somewhere, right?
It does. I'll just throw this out there. I was listening to the news a few weeks ago, and I was, of all people, Mark Cuban, who's a fellow Dallasite where I am, and he was basically saying the government should have just opened up their coffers and done direct deposit into business bank accounts until the worst of the virus passed, and just provided overdraft protection and had that be what the stimulus looked like.
Yeah, that's too easy. That's too simple, Danielle.
I was like, well, that would have been simple and elegant. That would have just, because basically what you would have done, as opposed to creating all this potential buildup of financial distress and the need for bankruptcy, is you would have literally just pushed pause. Just pushed pause on the economy. And I think that would have been, I don't think you would see the same protest that you're seeing today about reopening the economy. If you had just done something that was that simple and said, look, we're going to come together. We're going to hit the pause button. We'll see in 3-4 months. And nobody's going to be the worse for it when we come and reopen the economy.
Yeah.
But that something that sensible was not done. And, now you've got this next stimulus package coming through Congress that looks like yet another Band-Aid.
Yeah, rinse, wash, wash, rinse, repeat.
Yes.
And the same results. They'll run out of money in 15 minutes, and everyone will feel like they got screwed. I mean, look how long it's taken the IRS to get those checks out. We're already a month into this, and they know how to write checks. They sent out 80 million paper checks yesterday. So in terms of governmental efficiency, it just doesn't exist. So hopefully, Danielle, the next time we talk, this thing will have blown over. I think we have reached the peak, and by all charts, it appears so. The testing is an issue, but we're testing more than ever, and we're finding less. So, like I said, 1,000 new cases in a state the size of Florida. Granted, testing is spotty, but there are drive-through facilities in 3 largest counties that I know of, and more around. So anyone who wants to get tested or needs to pretty much is able to. Other states I can't really say. But hopefully the next time we talk, this will be a distant memory, but then we're going to be dealing with the fallout of this thing potentially for decades. And that's the part that I find extremely troubling. And hopefully somebody up in DC knows something that we don't, although I haven't heard them say it if they do. But you got to wonder, huh?
You do have to wonder, and I would hope that if something like this leaves scars on people, that it means that we're going to be more demanding in the future of our public representatives.
Yeah, and that really is what it comes down to, because we've just given them a free pass and they can do what they want, and really all we do is grumble about it, and people don't realize that that you do have some power, but not alone. It has to be done together. And the whole dichotomy of political parties, I think, is just there to divert and turn people against each other so they can't be held accountable. But that's a story for another day. So best place to find you, DiMartinoBooth.com.
Actually, QuillIntelligence.com is the best place to find me. Yep, we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of Quill Intelligence, which is really the launch of a retail daily product, the Daily Feather. That happens Memorial Day. I'm hoping that we'll be in a happier place by then. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, @DiMartino Booth.
Yes, and hey, we really appreciate you coming on. I realize there are things you just can't say on the mainstream media, and that's probably why you do come on shows like mine. We appreciate your honesty and forthrightness. Good luck, and Any questions or comments for Danielle? We'll forward them to her. Just email me, kl@kerrylutz.com. Twitter feeds @KerryLutz. Facebook page, Financial Survival Network. Danielle, thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Likewise. Take care.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.